So Willis, the singer at the centre of this story, he describes himself as a sorcerer and a wizard, and I think that's what you've achieved with this film. It's kind of audio-visual syntax.
Mm.
Um, is that something you were consciously going out of your way to make something truly original and different?
Yeah, I mean, I, I'm not interested in typical story and in typical plot that's recognizable and easily digestible. I'm interested, as best as possible, to join a tradition of filmmakers who are trying to create new language as they go. And one of the things that I wanted to do with this movie was to create something that you can't pin down, that you can't say, oh, well, that movie is just like this, this, and this. I wanted to create something where you never knew where it was going, where you never felt 100% on solid ground, because that's where I'm most comfortable when in a mystery, and in a sense of the unknown. And that's where Willis, this character, exists. He exists in this place where it's iridescent, like it's translucent. It can change at any minute, and that's the kind of cinema that I'm interested in, and that's the kind of language that I was trying to put forth with the film.
It's strange that a film that's so translucent is so satisfying. You know, there's so much to it, even if you struggle at times to piece it all together.
Sure.
I'm wondering how that looks on the page, in script form.
Well, in script form, originally I wrote a number of drafts of a short story, basically a short story, and I turned that into a kind of treatment story, which goes in and out of pieces of dialogue as well. It's about 40 pages long, and it has the same kind of arc as what you see in the film, in terms of it feels like it could evaporate at any time. So I wrote this kind of story that gives you an idea of the kind of film that I wanted to make. I showed it to Willis. He really, really, I mean, he said that everything he's ever wanted to say is in the story. I showed it to my cinematographer and my producer, of course. And to gain access to development funds, I showed it to people, and always saying, this is where we're going to start. This is the idea of the film. And then when we were making the film, we never referred to the script. We'd build one day at a time, and everything would be planned out and by design, but everything in the script that had dialogue or that had set plans were kind of excavated and then allowed to be emptied for the people to fill it. So I knew that I wanted a scene with, let's say, Willis in the church. And I said, Willis, they're gonna call you up to the church and they're gonna ask you to sing.
Obviously, being a challenging film, not only for what your actors have to do and
Right.
you know, to be there in the moment, but for us as an audience, I can imagine that getting that development funding that you were talking about wasn't exactly a walk in the park. And there's an interesting story, isn't there, where it's
Sure.
tied into the Venice Film
Sure,
Festival
sure.
where you screened.
You can't and shouldn't get film financing unless you're Gus Van Sant or Terrence Malick by saying, I've got this great idea, and that's it. I went through the Venice Biennale Cinema College, their first round of development funds, where they chose 3 films, and you develop your project. And I developed a very serious belief in the film with them, and I worked on story, and I worked on dialogue, and I worked on structure, and I introduced the ideas of what I wanted to do, and I took notes on what they wanted to do, and I wrote real dialogue, and I'm pretty decent at dialogue. I can write decent dialogue, and all the while I kept saying, I probably will not use this dialogue.
So you did have a more traditional script.
It wasn't a
format
script. It was just
originally.
it was it was a story. If you imagine reading a short story by Raymond Carver or something, there's dialogue in it, but it's more atmosphere is what the author wants you to understand. So there was dialogue, and there was this idea of, like, this is a story that's very developed. Now, the first time I showed the movie to Venice in rough cut, a nerve-wracking experience, and I wouldn't say it was a successful screening, because I had taken everything that I'd put in the script and I had just kind of changed the language and changed gears, so to speak, and taken it in the rhythm that I always knew that I was going to take, but only is possible when you have it on film. Like, you can't write that. You can't write, in a lot of ways, the aura of what what the movie turns out to be, and so it took them by surprise. But the more that we're able to talk about it together, and I reworked it as well, everyone got behind the project. It's just, even for an art institution like the Biennale, they want a plan, they want that plan executed, and I'm interested in executing a plan that's organic and that's alive. And so when things go this way, I'm okay with them going this way. If things want to go that way, then we start pushing them that way to see what happens. If certain characters start to grow stale, they drop away, and maybe we'll find new characters along the way. That, to me, is a living cinema, and that's the kind of project that I pitched to them and that I developed with them. It's just, when it becomes a reality, it's new, and so it's sometimes a little bit startling for people who've been in the development process. Even my cinematographer when he saw the edit, was like, wanted to know more, and it was a process of real growth all the way to the end. And you just have to be confident in the kind of filmmaking that you want to do, and the people who are helping you do that. So.
Well, not only is it an independent film in the sense of its challenging form, but you mentioned Malick and Gus Van Sant. As somebody who pines for that golden era of indie in the 90s, this is the most 90s looking film I've probably seen since Steve Buscemi's Trees Lounge.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I mean, it's of the independent film. A lot of independent film, I feel, is really stale, and is using the same formulas and telling the same stories and using the same plot points and shot, reverse shot, really kind of telling the same thing. And the real great independent cinema from the 90s, or even before that, with Cassavetes, and those people were inventing a new platform to stand on, and people like Jarmusch, or people like Gus Van Sant, or Terrence Malick. I'm not saying I'm at any of those people's level. They're masters. But the idea is, to me as a filmmaker, is not to invent just for invention's sake, but to push the language, to push the art, or to pull it in different directions. And I think nobody has really done that a lot, or gotten away with it a lot, because you get marginalized if you make films like this. I don't know if have you seen the film Putty Hill?
Yes.
Putty Hill is a great movie, and it got some play. But if that were made in 1989 or 1992, it'd be a masterpiece. It'd be much more widely seen. If Jim Jarmusch's Stranger in Paradise were made today, people wouldn't see it.
Yeah, Putty Hill I found hidden on US iTunes.
Right.
So it's not like I could just go and download it.
Right. No, it wasn't offered to you in any kind of marketed sense. I feel like the formula, and there are people, there's a community of filmmakers and artists in general, that I think there's a real formula in independent film, that is just that. It's a formula. And I do think that there are people who are creating aside from that formula, or around that formula. But it is hard to get your film, an inventive film, seen.
Well, we mentioned quite a list there of masters from the era, and your film actually reminded me not of any of the ones we've mentioned, but one person in particular, John Sayles, in the way that you decentralize the protagonists from the narrative, and you kind of give it over to the people in his life, or at least the people he comes into contact with, and maybe even more so actually the environment. I mean, it's called Memphis after all, so I guess the clue is in the title, but I haven't seen a film in a long time that really not only connected with the environment, but grappled with it and wrestled with it and felt tactile.
Well, the film is certainly about an artist in Memphis, but to me that is Memphis. I wanted to make a movie that felt that to me Memphis is a great city, a great vortex of culture and spirituality, and at the same time I feel like it's being reclaimed by nature a little bit, and the trees are towering above these buildings that are no longer in top shape, or the sidewalks are filled with grass coming out of them, and I wanted the sounds to feel like they were coming from those cracks in the sidewalk, like almost like phantoms, like phantom sounds or ghost sounds, not in the kind of spooky sense, but in the kind of sense that the past and the future and the present are all being mixed around in kind of a mythic form.
Well, it's about a singer, kind of my interpretation. In one sense, he's got obvious talent. Interestingly, your film in the press screenings, it screamed immediately after David Cross's hits.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen. I mean, I'm a big David Cross fan. But
Well, the interesting thing about that is that film is about people who want to be famous by not doing anything.
Right.
And then your film is about a guy who he doesn't want fame, but what he does, he wants it to matter.
Right.
And with hits, it's a girl who wants to be on The Voice.
Right.
That's not real music, and this film is about the blood and the sweat and the tears that go into it. Right. But is it in one sense really about a soul man who is, I wouldn't say lost his soul, he's kind of misplaced it?
Yeah. Well, he's searching for it. And the thing is, by naming the film Memphis, a lot of people will come to this movie looking for a kind of rollicking soul music movie. And that's not the case. That's, I think, the more idealized version or the tourist version of what this could be. And listen, I love soul music. I love the history of Memphis and the history of soul music. But to me, this is more about the concept of soul, not just soul music. And so the soul music is the stuff that Willis is tapping out on sticks and whistling, and the stuff that he's kind of howling into the night a little bit. That to me is this person he's on a journey to save his soul in the essence, in the real gospel impulse of it, rather than rather than someone who's trying to save his soul by making a hit. Like, it's not, that's not what these artists, that's not what Thelonious Monk was trying to do, or Miles Davis was trying to do, or John Coltrane was trying to do, or even Kurt Cobain was trying to do. The true artists that I find interesting, and same with Willis and this character, they're searching for something that's hard to define, possibly impossible to define. They're reaching into the sublime, into something, and their whole persona and body and spirit has to go that direction. I mean, and we all want to know things about the meaning of life, but you can't know. You can only try and grasp it. And so an audience might be frustrated by that, by this attempt to kind of show something that maybe we're not exactly sure what the product is. It's not the product, it's the process,
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it, how when the film opens, as someone who's reviewing films and sees a lot of American indies, you might peg it right off the bat and say, okay, we've got a hardscrabble bumblefuck town. Yeah. We've been here, and we were talking about indie cinema and the formula. Mm-hmm. There's a sense that, is this going to go the same way? And what's fascinating to me is it's not about small town angst. It's always about in the formula. It's always about these characters wanting to escape the town, and this is really small town existentialism.
Yeah, it's a quest for the unknown, to reach into the unknown, at least. And I start the movie with the talk show and with Willis talking about sorcery, and that always gets a laugh, and I'm glad it gets a laugh. And I mean, that's great for people to be like charmed by him. But I believe that Willis and this character are sorcerers. Like, I believe in wizardry and Willis believes in wizardry. I believe in trying to do something using magic, exactly what he says, and then the magic comes through, but the magic doesn't always connect, or it doesn't always fulfill what you thought it would fulfill. That's all. That's the philosophy of the movie. That's the kind of philosophy of life that he's talking about. So it's funny because it's different, but it says right away, like, this movie is about larger things.
And that's cinema, really, isn't it? In terms, especially with a film like yours, that is that much harder to get made. It's, sorcery. I've always used the term alchemy.
Yeah, sure.
Often, this coming together of all these different voices.
Sure.
And the fact that you get any kind of cohesive, watchable product at the end of it is a miracle to me every time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it can fail, and everyone, and you risk failure when you're doing it this way. And certain people would call Memphis a failure, or certain people would call my first film, Pavilion, a failure, because it doesn't give them something that they understand. I think people, nobody wants to feel like they don't get it. And nobody wants to be in a position where they think someone's trying to outsmart them. And I'm not doing that as a filmmaker at all, but I am trying to present people with something that they can't explain in a soundbite, or that maybe if they watched it twice, it would grow. And I think that's very, I think today's movies, you watch it once, if that, and you're like, all right, got it. Or you forget about it. Or some movies, like the most recent one I can think of is Under the Skin by Jonathan Glazer, where you watch that 3 times, it's going to open up. I mean, it's just starting. It's like you don't listen to your favorite album once. You listen to your favorite album 1,000 times. And I think that I'm not expecting anyone to watch Memphis more than once, but for those who do, it grows. It doesn't grow tired. It grows wider,
And I mean, this is exactly what Shane Carruth with Upstream Colour was talking about.
Totally.
I think he used your comparison, in fact, that he said, the album experience.
Right. Right. That's the kind of, yeah.
Why can't that operate in this medium?
And that's the kind of movie that, again, that if you believe in it, when you believe in it, it's astounding, And yeah, there are people who could be like, yeah, I didn't really go with it. It's like, that's fine. There are movies that connect to a huge audience, and there are movies that connect to a specific audience. But the specific audience who's open to this kind of filmmaking, there's a lot of reward in it, There's a lot of reward in a couple critics coming out of Sundance and Park City said, well, it demands patience. My film demands patience. And it's like, well, yeah, it does. But it rewards patience, and not a ton of our media seems to do that now. That you don't need patience, and patience is not a virtue. But in like an Upstream Colour, or if you go and watch any of the films that all these filmmakers that work today all worship, like Antonioni or Tarkovsky, their names pop up all the time, but yet their style of filmmaking is thought of as like paint drying. Like it takes patience to watch Tarkovsky. Yeah, I'm sorry, it does, but it rewards that patience. Patience is a virtue, with certain kinds of films, certain kind of art. And I think it's important to keep producing stuff like that reminds the viewer that you have to give in. You have to cut everything else out and let these things breathe like art, not just the formula. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And what about the contradiction of Willis himself? Fascinating, really, in that he's trying to create something profound, and there's maybe a sense that in order to do so, he may need to leave town. I got the sense that he does want to, because he's maybe been there a long time, maybe even his whole life, but yet he also seems perfectly content with what he has.
Yeah, he him, people all want him to sing throughout the movie, and there are people who watch the movie and say, why, I wish he sang more. And it's like, if you listen and you watch, he sings a lot. He's just not singing for profit. You know what I mean? He's not paying bills with it, or he's not doing it in the expected way, but he sings a lullaby to his gangster friend as they drive down the road. The sweetest lullaby in the world. Like, that's song. You know, I once read an interview with an artist named Bonnie Prince Billy, who's Will Oldham, who's a singer, and he was talking about singing friends to sleep, and the interviewer was like, that's kind of really, and he's like, yeah, like that's the power of song. It's not just about making a record or making money. It's about how you use that or how that is a part of you, and that's what like Willis is more interested, not even interested, but Willis's understanding of music is something that's more instinctual or animal or just part of his person, you know.
And when we do see Willis sing in the traditional movie sense, we see him singing, but we don't hear it. You have this swell of the Hammond organ, which I just think speaks so much to, you know, his artistic dissatisfaction, maybe. I mean, what was the choice of that moment? Just because it's the moment I keep coming back to.
Really?
It was so wonderful and unusual.
That scene is about how voices and instruments connect, because I do think, you know, musicians working and just like filmmakers working together, there's this great sense of listening and what you hear from someone else affects how you then put out into the world. But Willis in that studio, while he's, you know, he's affecting all these great musicians. When it comes back to watch him, he's I wanted him to kind of be on a almost funeral, like it's a funeral march for him. That it's this organ is lifting him, but also it's almost strangling him. And so that's why I just put the sound of the organ in. I mean, that is one of the greatest Hammond organ players in the history of American music playing that. But it's the idea of once everybody's like, okay, now we're gonna hear him sing. Now it's gonna be great. It's like, no, he's doing this. This is not him. This is not his will, and it's beating him. And that's why you go to that interview afterwards where he's talking, and he talks about the whole process in the bar. He talks about how you want to do this. You want to try to do something a little extra. You want to do something a little different, and then try and convince people, and people don't understand, and then the dissension, and that scene is not one of triumph, and I think a lot of people wanted that recording session to be one of triumph. It's not of triumph. That not to Willis, and not to the spirit of the movie.
Well, the organ that we hear, you said it's played by the best player of Hammond organ right now. Who is that?
I'm trying to think which his name is. It's that scene is the Teeny Hodges and
the guy with the orange.
Teeny Hodges, who's Al Green. That's Al Green's band. I mean, that's the high rhythm section, the original high rhythm section, except for the drummer. Howard Grimes is not the drummer. Ed Cleveland is, but that's Al Green's guitarist who's working with me. Like, what's his name? Willie. And I'm spacing on the guy's name, but in the white hat, he's the guy who plays the intro in Al Green's all that famous album of Al Green, and they played with Elvis. Those guys, I mean, they've seen it all.
The scene in which the guitarist is ragging on Willis, is that him?
That's him ragging on Willis. So what we did was we created this scene where Willis had written a song, and we hired the high rhythm section, set this whole thing up, and said, you guys are going to create this Willis Earl Beale song. And they said, great. And we set it up as a session. We had a very specific thing. We only wanted to shoot close-ups. I didn't want to make a music documentary where you're seeing fingers on a fret and you're seeing this kind of more standardized thing. I just wanted to see these faces that this music has been created out of. I mean, if you look at Teeny Hodges while he plays that riff, I mean, I mean, not to be cliche, but that's the blues. Like, that's the history of soul music right there, without saying a single line. And so we set that up and let it transpire as a documentary. There's a great track, you know, there's a fantastic track that we can put out into the world. But a lot of people wanted me to put that track at the end of the movie, but that's not the track that is the movie. That's just the track that was that day. That was their gig, you know.
And as one would expect, it's musicians talking through their instruments. There was a confounded critic I spoke to afterwards who said he was expecting, again, going back to formula, I don't know if this happens in Ray, I'm going on memory here, but I could sense from the discussion from that scene, you know, you get a tangible sense that these are great musicians, they're all in a room, they're all jiving off each other, there's a vibe, but it's ever so slightly out of key.
Right.
And that's what I loved about it. Whereas this guy's saying, well, you know, I'm expecting Willis to kind of get up and you know, throw some instruments around and tell them how they don't understand his vision.
Right. That he has to explain the movie to everybody. And it's either one of jubilation and everybody's happy, or it's one of total frustration and he throws a cymbal or yells at them. Like, Willis isn't going to yell at the high rhythm section even if he wants to. First of all, there's too much respect in the room. But the idea is that that's explicit. That's the movie, and how we act towards people typically is implicit. It's implied. It's thought but maybe not spoken. You have to figure that out for yourself. And the idea that there isn't this kind of guide that's saying, okay, now I can watch like this, or now I can understand it because the mood is this. People, the ground is moist all the time in this movie. It's soft, and you have to wonder maybe if that step was the right step, or maybe that step over to your right is the safer step. You have to walk carefully, and you have to just keep walking and trying and being open to it. It's not about textbook, and it's not, people want catharsis or they want confrontation. But in the world that I'm trying to set up, and I think more realistically, it's not so cut and dry. It's not so clear. Things don't get clear. People might be angry, but they don't express it a certain way. People might be connecting, and other people might just be missing. And that, to me, is more of the rhythm and the kind of language of real life. And at the same time, of this Memphis's kind of dream life at the same time. And for critics who want certain things, or audience who want certain things, it's like, this movie doesn't satisfy that, and that's too bad. I mean, that's something that I have made by design. So,
I am wondering, because you've done quite a few festivals now, and as I'm talking to people about it and my friends, and I'm saying, not only because I love the movie, but I'm saying to them, you have to come and see this in the cinema because sound is so key. And the first thought I had as the credits were going up is, I'm lucky enough at home to have a great system. Yeah. But I'm thinking, how is this going to play for everyone else? Because you have the scene in which Willis is in his house and there's that storm coming, and he steps outside and we can hear the rain and the wind in the trees, and the house seems to be, because it's quite a ramshackle house, cabin, a hut really, cabin. It seems to be shaking almost, and he as well. It's that sense of what we were talking about, the rootlessness of kind of the wanderlust.
Yeah. The woods are calling him.
Yeah. Which he does indeed go there, doesn't he? Yeah. Although I would like to just ask you point blank about that scene. I've kind of got my own interpretation of everything other than that, and maybe I'll need a few more viewings to figure it out. But I would love to just get your take on his disappearance, without spoiling it too much for people at home. Why he disappears into the woods and burns furniture and odd bric-a-brac.
Well, he speaks a lot about burning things down in the movie. Very, sporadically he wants to burn it down, and to me the burning it down is kind of this. He goes from place to place and ends up in this cabin, which is his friend's cabin in a way, which is really like, it's the last place in civilization that it's on the edge of civilization, those cabins. And we shot at those places. That is where those cabins. One of those cabins is where James Jones wrote "From Here to Eternity," and so we went looking for this place that felt like it was hidden from the world and close to the natural world, and that this place just again like had this. It was calling to us in a way. So we created the interior. It was all production design, but we wanted to create this place that would be Willis's last place. Like the bathroom, he goes into the bathroom and it's the earth. It's like the pipes. It's like things are starting to crumble and implode. The natural world is calling him, and then he sits and listens to those trees, and it really is he's going out, and you're not sure if he wants to go out and do battle, or if he's going out into he's on a mission, and is that mission is, you know, people have talked about like Thoreau, like that mission is for him to go out and find peace. In a way, it's just a guy who's in certain ways just trying to get out of the city and get out of this world and get into a new, cleaner, quieter space that has nothing but nature. I mean, in a way, it's like a very pagan kind of move. Animal move. He climbs trees. He becomes kind of one with the woods. And you know, when he comes back, the question is, does he ever leave the woods? Because I'm undecided on that personally. Like, he could come back, or that whole last sequence could just be his transition into a new place.
Well, you talked about paganism, and of course, what about religion by virtue of Memphis, where you're shooting it? Very religious, but again, what you do that bucks that trend in a really interesting way. I felt, at least, that the film oftentimes deflects questions of religion. You know, you have the kid who's asked, "Do you believe in God?" To which he says, "Yep." There's a pause. Right. He tries to articulate why, can't, and actually shrugs it off as an afterthought. There's also the shot where you see the sign that says "Think God," and the kids are whizzing by on these bikes, but of course they're going by so fast they're not stopping to think about God. You know, it's just there because it's always been there. But I'm not sure that this younger generation, or you know, maybe even Willis himself, are connected in the way that the signposts.
Right, or in the way that their fathers or their grandfathers are connected. I mean, Memphis is a town of churches, and the African American experience is one of that has come out of the church in many ways, and the Southern experience is one of churches. And so I want, and church works for people. Like the people at Peace Baptist Church, that's their church. That church is their place to be loved and to love. And whether it's a love of their own people or the people around them or the people that they meet or their God, it works for them in the same way that you know, a Passover Seder is going to work for some Jews, or you know, a Catholic church is going to work for other people, or a mosque. People go and worship because it's for them. Now, I wanted to show that, like, a very openly that, you know, the movie is spiritual. Memphis is a very Christian place, but the movie is much more of more of a ragged kind of pagan place where spirituality matters, where spirituality is all around us. Worship is all around us, but that's not Willis's church. Willis doesn't go back to the church to sing. He goes to the woods. He goes to the church of the unknown in a way. But I'm excited for to go back and show people from the church that movie, because I think it's entirely respectful of the religious experience, because it believes, and it doesn't say one thing or the other. It just shows people in worship in different ways. And in the same way, like, it's my way of just, you know, walking with Constance under the tree and having her look up and showing what she's seen, and it's just a tree walking under a tree in the breeze. Like, that's my church. Like, I'm much more kind of a believer in the idea of nature and people's environments and stuff. So again, like, I think someone from that church will come out of the movie and think it's a Christian movie, and I think other people can come out of the movie thinking it's just a spiritual movie, and I want everyone to get their own experience out of it. So I just wanted to show and not instruct, you know.
Well, one thing myself, you know, fans and people who weren't so big on the film were surprised about was the fact that the guy who directed this was white. And you know, it's an all-black cast, and the town, and my first kind of question, kind of not being as familiar with the area, was kind of where you come into it and the specific town in which you shot. I'm not sure exactly where that is, but whether you had been there before and whether this particular town was specific to that story.
Well, Memphis is at the heart of the movie, and never was it going to be Bourbon Street. I mean, there's a scene on Bourbon Street, but it's the darkest, kind of most, it's the hell that the Willis is in at that point. But
But even within Memphis, I guess is what I'm trying to say, these specific areas in which you shoot, because you do a thing where it's, you know, it's not about poverty porn. There are people of you know, all kinds of different incomes, none of them doing, mostly just getting by. But I could see, as I was watching it, you know, some are still better off than others.
Sure.
I was wondering about the specific area within Memphis and how you kind of ingratiate yourself with the people and so on.
It certainly it took time. I mean, the first thing that we did is I was able to, through some people I met, a woman who owns a barbecue place who took me to Peace Baptist Church. This is years ago, and I went to Peace Baptist Church, and then when we wanted to make the movie, we went back to Peace Baptist Church.
So why were you there originally?
I accepted a small job to do short films for a magazine about barbecue, and I accepted it just so I could go down and spend. I mean, the films didn't amount to much, but I went down and spent 5 days with my cinematographer in Memphis, and we used that time for me to kind of concoct an idea of like who could the story be about in this town. But I think the thing is, we never pretended that we were insiders. I think an insider making this movie would have made a totally different movie. I think it was important that the film was from an outside perspective, but we were very keen to not be strangers. Outsiders, yes; strangers, no. So we spent a lot of time building relationships and going around the area, never going to blocks that we weren't asked to be on. And I think if you care about the people, Al Maisel said that, like, if you care about your subject, if you love your subject, that's what matters. And if and as Cassavetes said the same thing, you have to love the people you're filming. You can't just go in there and film them. And I mean, I come from a place where my whole goal was to show a vision of another vision of Memphis, a new vision of Memphis that fits the millions of stories that have come and gone through that town, and through the aura of the blues experience, or the African American experience, or the church experience. And I was making a movie about people, not about black people. I could have made the whole movie based on an Alex Chilton type character for Big Star. You know, he's as Memphis as anybody. I could have made a movie about William Eggleston. He's as Memphis as the next guy, even though he's white and privileged. But the movie I wanted to make was about these people, and at the same time,
Did you know that right away?
Yeah.
When you went there the first time, that I have to make a film here.
Yeah. No, I would never make a movie about a musician and call it Philadelphia. Like, it's just not. It doesn't hold the same meaning. Memphis is a place of great spiritual meaning to many, many people. And some people explain it like Beale Street or the blues. I mean, Memphis is named for an Egyptian kingdom. Like, there's something much deeper there that I think the people who live there embody, if not talk about or know. But the people who I met there were filled with a sense of wisdom that I wanted to learn from and respected. And I didn't go in there saying, "This is what you're going to do. Read these lines." I went in there and I met people and I said, "Can we be a part of your world?" And that's the film. The film is us, you know, flowing into this river called Memphis rather than me telling them what to do. And I think that's why the movie works. And that's why it's a movie about people. And I'm not it's not a black film. I'm not a white director. It's a film about humanity, you know, at its essence. And I think that if you do it respectfully, that you can at times transcend all of that. And I think the film does that.
So we've been talking here at Sundance UK, and you know, you've been on the festival trail some time now. I'm just wondering kind of what you expect the reaction might be from these screenings, maybe based on, you know, where it's screened before this. We've kind of talked about the critical response being very mixed.
Well, the first time it screened at well, first of all, the first time it screened at Venice, it screened one time, and a lot of people walked out, and I wasn't sure if I was told that's kind of a Venice thing to do. I don't know if that's true. And I think a lot of people, and then at the press screening at Sundance, I was told 30 reporters walked out of the movie, which I think is absolutely appalling, that they can't give 80 minutes to a film. They're a reporter, and then would tweet, you know, it's a mess, or would tweet like it goes nowhere, and that, you know, unfortunately that affects the trajectory, the quick trajectory of the movie. Like, the movie was never going to be a breakout hit. I don't make movies that bust out, but I do make movies that kind of seep out and grow. Memphis is a film that when it hits the right person, it hits them for life, or it hits them in a deep way. And for the other people, some people might say cinematography was great. Okay, that's your point. Okay, I can live with that. Or Willis is so interesting. Great, I love the music. Fantastic. But the small percentage of people who it's made for, you know, made for, like, people who really are going to open up to it, are it's, you know, I would say it stays with them as much as it stays with me. I mean, it becomes a part of them, and not in any kind of pretentious way, but that's the goal. The goal is to make a movie that offers a spiritual experience. And there are people, every screening I've had so far, there are people who get that, and most of the people get something, but might not be open to the rest of it, or patient enough for the rest of it. I think that the critics, though, you know, some really dig it. You know, unfortunately, you're dependent on critics, and I do think, like, there are a band of critics that really get this kind of film and want to champion this kind of film and want to analyze this kind of film. And I think a lot of other people want to write very quickly about the film that's going to sell to Sony Pictures Classics, and that's, you know, to me, that's a giant shame, and disappointing. What's important is that it does reach the people who really believe, and it gives us all a sense of, like, okay, let's keep going. You know, whether you're a writer writing about it, or whether you're a filmmaker making films, or whether it's all kind of continuing the dialogue.
So in that sense, although it is disappointing, and you must, you know, when this happens, obviously you get angry about it, but it is that film that in critical circles will separate, you know, real cinephiles from the fly-by-night bloggers.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll do that, and I also think, you know, there are films that I feel, you know, like a film like Gummo, which I recently rewatched. I mean, Gummo is a big influence on me, and I feel like Gummo is a living, breathing organism. Like, when I think about Gummo on the shelf, I feel like it's got new wrinkles, or it's kind of grown a little, or its hair is longer, because I feel like it's not just sitting on the shelf. Most films will become nothing. They'll just go away. They'll get deleted. They'll be deleted files, or they'll be one of the billion things that no one looks at on the internet. And I do think that there is a body of work being created by certain filmmakers and certain musicians, Willis one of them, that, I mean, this is the stuff that will be around, I feel, for centuries. I feel like both Pavilion and Memphis are not hits. They're so not hits, but they're gonna grow. They're always gonna have an audience.
But you must be, for Sundance UK audiences specifically, you know, America being a foreign country, but you've made an America within an American film festival that feels truly foreign. And you must, you know,
Well,
you must get a big kick out.
I dig it. I mean, I think, you know, the filmmaking sensibility that I have is still probably a little bit more accepted in Europe and in London. I think, you know, Pavilion, my first film, played in people dug it, but it was a very, it was not what you would call an award winner. And then it played at the Torino Film Festival and won. And it was just, it didn't strike me. I don't believe in winning, like films winning over other films, but it struck me for the first time that there is this passionate audience here and there in different pockets. And I feel like, you know, with Londoners' love of music and kind of, I think a sophisticated taste, that it will reach. There'll be that chunk of people in the theater tomorrow. Not everybody, but there will be a chunk of people in the theater that want to see it again, and that want to talk about it on the tube home or something like that. And that will happen whether it's in America or whether it's in Europe. There's a small band of people who you know, this film is going to speak to, and it's going to be a part of them.
Well, to wrap it up, in an age where Sundance, you know, I've loved it all my life, one could make the argument that it's kind of its own brand now, and
Sure.
there are negatives and positives to that.
Sure.
And you know, you've made a film that really harkens back, I think, to the spirit of what a festival like this is all about.
Uh-huh.
And so for that, you know, we're so lucky and thrilled to have you here.
Thanks.
And you know, we hope the audiences feel the same way.
Yeah, well, I do too, but I appreciate the dialogue. It's to be able to talk in depth about something is very rare in media right now. So it was great to be able to talk about it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate your time.
sure.